Hello, hello everyone. Uh, Today we are in the week 2, assignment 2 of Modern Indian Architecture course. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Shreya Shukla. I am the NPTEL course TA for this course. This NPTEL course, Modern Indian Architecture. The instructor of this course is Professor Prabhajit Chani. He is a professor at IIT Roorkee. Today we will be doing the previous year question for week 2, and we will wait for 5 minutes for everyone to join, for more people to join, and then we'll start with the presentation. Let's just wait for 5 minutes. We'll start at 6:05. We'll start with the session now. Uh, Hello, good evening everyone again. Today we will be doing week 2 and assignment 2. Uh, just to remind you again, the questions that I would be doing today are previous year questions. They are not this year's question. And as it has been instructed to us, we are not supposed to tell you this year's questions. We are only supposed to solve the previous year questions. So without any further ado, we'll get started. Just to give a brief for those who are joining today for the first time, who didn't join the last session. So the course outline is that modern Indian architecture, we will be talking about Indian architecture in today's time. And in this particular course, it has been discussed the evolution of modern Indian architecture from pre-independence to the present time. And this evolution will be seen through various trends, building typologies, covering many buildings over a span of nearly a century. many famous architects who have made a significant contribution in the development of modern Indian architecture, be it Indian architects, be it Western architects, be it British architects who were when India was under colonial rule. And the course ends with a study of 21st century Indian architecture. This is the timeline that is being covered in this course from pre-independence to 21st century. So in pre-independence, three styles were covered: Indo-Sasanic, Colonial and Art Deco. And we have already discussed previous year question on this particular part in the last session. And today we will be talking about modernism in India, revivalism, the first generation of Indian architects, works of CPWD. So these are the few topics that we will be covering today in this session, the questions related to those topics. So this is the typical timeline that will be covered in this course. So the course objective is the evolution of modern architecture in India via structure, function and form, the Vitruvian triad, and the individual works of iconic architects to understand their design approaches, various forces that impacted modern Indian architecture, upcoming concepts such as energy efficiency, green buildings, etc., and concepts and ideas about various buildings typologies which students can directly apply in their design studio. So this week's syllabus is first pre-independence to independence part 2. Pre-independence to independence part 1 was covered in last week, which mostly talked about Art Deco, especially Art Deco style in Mumbai. And today in pre-independence to independence part 2, this part includes the modernist approach, the modernist architecture interpretation, especially in context of India, what was happening around in the world. For example, international styles were coming up around the world in Europe, like Bauhaus and other things, while in India was trying to find its own style and its own identity. And also tropical modernism, how critical regionalism came into play, how architects started to develop, to take the foreign concepts and adapt them according to the climate context of India, and thus different features came up. Then second lecture was revivalism. Revivalism basically talks about the fact that after we got independence, there was a debate about what should be the style of the Indian architecture. So for a few for a time period, for some specific buildings, some architects adapted this style where they wanted to revive the traditional Indian architecture, which is the temple architecture, mostly either Buddhist temples or Hindu temples. So they strongly interpreted those, added those elements in the design, especially in the form. Plans were mostly still Western, but the form was typically added, like infused with traditional Indian architecture of especially the temple architecture of India. And some famous examples of the revivalism in Indian context are IIT BHU, Vidhan Sadha in Bangalore. So yeah, a few examples. And then for the first generation, 1945 to 1970. So just after independence, what was happening in India, all the scenarios, how because of partition there was a huge refugee problem, and then we needed extra housing for the increase in population and the refugees, the work of CPWD, what major role CPWD played in shaping the modern Indian architecture, and the debate on style, what style to go with, what style to approach. So for example, there was a debate going on that they wanted to adapt to the modernist principles that were happening in the West, but somewhere the Indian architects, when the CPW, especially people part of CPWD, they chose to keep continuing with the Lutyens, Delhi's architecture and their ideologies, and they added a few Indian traditional elements to those designs. They didn't typically go with the proper other ideologies that were happening in West, the proper modernist ideologies where everything was very minimal, very rectilinear. So they stuck to the Lutyens ideology. then how they have interpreted the modernist ideas and added Indian traditional elements. All those parts were discussed here, and what are the typical features of a modernist house in India, because earlier the concept of a house was very different in India than what happened after, when we had this huge need of housing. So because of this need, uh, the idea and the design was also somehow shaped with it. So what changes happened in that? And then also these three lectures, the first generation, part 1, part 2 and 3, they also talk about the everyday architecture, and how they have not just it has not only been discussed the only the famous buildings, it has also been discussed the architecture of everyday life. For example, the housing where people were living, which are not designed by iconic architects per se. So those parts are also were also discussed in these lectures. So we'll start with today's questions. So just a second. So we'll start with today's question. So high ceiling in Kerala houses is done to encourage, and there have been 4 examples that have been given here. Sorry. Stack effect, sunlight, landscape, and perspective. So before we move further, first of all, when we're talking about Kerala house, and Kerala is located in the tropical climate, they have uh, the temperature difference between summer and winter is not that much, and they are categorized by lots of humidity and lots of hot feeling. So uh, by thinking of that, definitely the idea is not to encourage the use of sunlight more, especially in Kerala. So this is what a typical Kerala house looks like. Some of These are some of the images that I got from Google. These are the typical features: the sloping roofs, a little high ceiling, the use of tiles on roofs, and all these features are a part of this. So, so when we are talking about specifically house, then we definitely know that it is not about landscape specifically. So our answer actually is the stack effect, and I would just explain quickly what stack effect is. So stack effect, it is also called the chimney effect. It is the movement of air into and out, in and out of the building through the different openings that are given in the building. They could be unsealed openings, they could be chimneys, they could be containers, they could be ventilators, they could be anything. So uh, specifically in the context of a house or a building, how this principle works is that the indoor air, when it warms up, it rises up. If you can see the diagram below, so when you see the arrow A, so the warm and less dense air, it rises up, and then it expands, and then it creates a pressure on the top, and wherever there are openings in the ceiling or in the top of the house, the air escapes through these open windows, ventilators, or any unintentional holes or any kind of opening that are given in this kind of house. So uh, which reduces the air pressure in the base of the building, which then causes the cold air from outside to come inside through the open doors, windows, and other kinds of openings. So what happens basically in stack effect is that the inside air gets warm, and then it rises up, and there are openings present in the upper part of the building, and then it escapes through those parts, and because of this, the pressure is reduced in the lower part of the building, because of which the cold air and then comes in. So this is how the stack effect usually works. So what happens in Kerala houses, because they provide high ceiling, the reason for this is so that when there is a lot of humidity, when the air is really warm and everything, so because of high ceiling, the air has space to rise up. So when you will have a small ceiling, then the air will still stay in this vicinity only. When there is a high ceiling, there is a space for air to go up, and then a few openings or ventilators or different kinds of fixtures can be provided on the upper part of the upper side of the building, through which the warm air can escape. So this is the principle of stack effect in buildings. uh, I could not find a specific section for a traditional Kerala house, but I found this section which shows the natural ventilation and stack effect of a traditional Malay house. Malay house as in our traditional typical house in Malaysia, because the climate is quite similar. So I have added it over here, so you can see how different kind of slopes are there, and these different kinds of openings is through which the uh, warm air can escape through. So our answer is 1, the stack effect. Yeah, Tamanna, it is based on the idea of ventilation. So I'm sorry, because when I am looking at the PPT, I don't really see what is happening in the meeting. So I will come back in every 15 minutes to check if there are any questions, and then I would answer those questions. So Sabarmati Ashram has a direct connection with the luxury, sunlight, minimalism or ornamentation. So I hope we all understand what all these 4 words mean. So this is what the original Sabarmati Ashram actually looks like. It was established in 1917 by Mahatma Gandhi, and it was designed by Gandhi and others who were around and who helped him. It's a very simple building, it's a very functional building. It was designed for comfort, it is very airy and it is very ventilated. It is deeply shaded. It is deeply shaded because Ahmedabad, as it is in Gujarat, in the west of India, it's a very hot place. We have hot and arid climate over there. We don't have hot and humid over there. We have hot and arid climate over there. So deep shade from heat is required. So Sabarmati Ashram, just to give a brief, just a few facts and a brief knowledge about this. It is also known as Gandhi Ashram. It is located in the Sabarmati suburb of Ahmedabad, Gujarat, on the banks of the river Sabarmati. It was one of the many residences of Mahatma Gandhi. It was originally the residence of Mahatma Gandhi and his wife Kasturba, and it is, the aura of this place is very calm and quiet along the Sabarmati river, and it is also the location where Gandhiji started Dandi March from. And right now this is a part of the bigger Sabarmati Sangrahalaya, which was designed by Charles Korea. So it's a part of that now. So when you look at this building, and then when you go back to your options, you see this is definitely not made for luxury, and we definitely do not want sunlight in, because again, looking at where the location is, it's in Ahmedabad, and Ahmedabad has hot and arid climate with severe high temperatures, so we definitely don't want sunlight in. And then when you look at this house, it is very simple, it is very traditional looking, very Indian style, and it's very simple. It is not ornamented. There are no details over here. There is no ornamentation. There is no carving. There is nothing. There is just a basic simple structure. So definitely not ornamentation. And of course, as it is very visible right now, the answer would be minimalism. So just like I have mentioned before also, to be able to answer these questions, you have to remember how these buildings look like, because even if you don't remember most of the facts about these buildings, but if you remember how they look like, you would be able to answer a lot of questions. So our answer is minimalism. Question third. The residential building Shyamli in Shantiniketan is a combination of Guttu House and Dilwara, Pothai House and Pagoda, Tribal Timber House and Garbhagriha, and Assam Mud House and Chaityagraha. So, first of all, what is the Shyamli building? The Shyamli in Shantiniketan, or Shyamuli as spoken in typical Bengali, is the heritage house of Rabindranath Tagore, which is located in Shantiniketan. It was an experimental house and it was built in Shantiniketan in 1935. Surendranath Kar prepared the architectural plan and Nandalal Bose prepared the visual perspective of this house. and this house has been recently innovated by Archaeological Survey of India as a deposit work, and it is a property of Vishwa Bharati at present. And this house is called experimental house because through this house, Rabindranath Tagore wanted to see that instead of having a thatched roof, which was vulnerable to fire hazards, if a permanent mud roof could be built, and this was a very low cost structure, and it served as a model house for villagers around there. And around that time, the walls were heavily built so that the weight of the mud roofs could be borne. So the walls were also made thick so that because the mud roof was higher, of course, definitely more in weight as compared to a thatched roof. So that's why the walls were also built heavy for that. So this is how it looks like. It has a very muddy because it has been made out of mud and then it has been plastered that way also. So it has a very muddy texture. So moving forward, just a second. These are the four kinds of houses that have been mentioned in the question. Guttu house, it's a typical kind of traditional architecture house in Karnataka. Then Pothai house, uh, which is a typical vernacular house of Pariyal tribe in Tamil Nadu. Then tribal timber house, it was just mentioned tribal timber house, it could be located in any place in India because we have different tribes in different parts of India and they have different kind of architecture. So I've just added one sample image over here. And then Assam mud house, which has mud plastered over it and a thatched roof on it. So and then it's quite evident that if you see the architecture of these four different kinds of vernacular house examples which have been added in the question, you can see that Shantiniketan in its I won't say as per looks because of course it has its own uh, style and own architecture form, but if we go by it, you can see that it's quite similar to the Assam mud house, especially because of the mud texture that has been on the outside. So talking about Assam mud house, they are commonly seen in hot climatic regions, and again Assam is located in your tropical region, or you can say hot and humid region. Because of high rainfall in these regions are highly humid and they are hot because of that. They are quite easy to build, they are cheap and affordable, and they keep the mud walls, they keep the interior cool even in hot climate regions. So based on that, definitely our answer would be Beam, Assam Mud House and Chaityagraha. And just to show the similarity of Chaityagraha and Shamli House over here, I have added one more slide. So what is a Chaityagraha? So a Chaitya hall, Chaityagraha refers to a shrine, sanctuary, temple or a prayer hall in Indian religions, specifically in Buddhism. This word is typically used for Buddhist temples where this large hall is there and it's called Chaityagraha. And it refers to a space with a stupa and a rounded apse at the end. Apse at the end as in a semicircular arched kind of thing opposite the entrance and a high roof with a rounded profile. Yeah, it has a very rounded profile. So this is one example of Ajanta cave temple, one of the Ajanta cave temples. And you can see this is the, on the left side, on the right side, you can see the entrance of Shamli house in Shantiniketan, and you can see the typical similarity over here. You can see two columns, you can see there is this one base, and then you can see the arch over it. So it has taken its inspiration from Chaityagraha in this way. So our answer is Assam Mud House and Chaityagraha. So question number 4. The new architectural concepts in excuse me So the new architectural concepts in modernist houses in India are bedroom with attached bathroom, free-flowing interiors, combined living and dining rooms, and all of these. So the idea of modernist housing that started in India after we got our independence, and then housing was on the rise, and then we were having all these ideas and other things. So how architects at that time, specifically the architects who studied abroad in one of the best universities in the world, in different kinds of universities, they came back to India, and then they from their learnings, from the modernist learnings that they have had in those Western school of thoughts, they applied them in India, and then they created this, you can say, modernist house in India, which is very different from the traditional house. A few concepts, not very different, I would say, but few concepts were very different. So they had more free, the modernist house in India that happened. This is an example of B.V. Doshi's own house, which he has designed himself. So they had more free flowing plans, and because RCC became a material of the modern era and public buildings, because of which this free flowing plan was possible, because you didn't need load bearing walls anymore. So, and you can have, because of RCC, you could have more span, where more clear span, and you just needed columns to support, and you didn't need heavy load bearing walls, because of which these free flowing plans were created. And because of this idea, because of having these free flowing plans, because having this space, the idea of expands, living rooms and dining rooms were combined to create a large space, to give a sense of space basically. And then bedrooms with attached bathrooms came into picture, because in earlier, especially in the traditional houses and especially in villages, if you guys know it, or if you would have ever studied it, the washroom in Indian culture was usually away from the house, because it was because the house was where you also used to put your deity, you also used to do puja, so washroom used to be outside of the house. So in the modernist house, the washroom was inside the house, and it was also attached to the bedroom for convenience. This was more functional, this was more convenient than what was happening traditionally. The plinths became lower, freestanding staircases were added, and more horizontal massing could be seen. So our answer would be all of these, because we had, in a modernist house in India, we had this idea of bedroom with attached washroom, free flowing interiors, and I explained why, because of the use of RCC. Then the combined living and dining rooms, and so the answer would be all of these. So I'll do this question, fifth one, and after this I'll just check your questions quickly, and then I'll answer your questions if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, we can go through the whole thing right now, and then I will answer the questions in the end. So fifth is, within the architecture community, IIA stands for Institute of Internal Auditors, Indian Institute of Architects, Indian Institute of Ayurveda, Indian Industries Association. So I guess most of us here would be knowing the answer to this. It's the Indian Institute of Architects. So anyway, most of us would have known this answer, but just to give a brief idea about IIA, I'm just speaking a few facts about IIA. So IIA is the national body of architects in India. It was established in 1917 with its headquarters in Mumbai. It is associated with the International Union of Architects, UIA, Commonwealth Association of Architects, CAA, and South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation of Architects, SARC. The institute, this IIA, has a major role to play in promoting the profession of architecture by organizing and uniting in fellowship the architects of India to promote aesthetic, scientific, and practical efficiency of the profession, both in practice and in education. On May 12, 1917, George Whittet, by then consulting architect to the government of Bombay, was unanimously elected as the first president of the Indian Institute of Architects, which Indian Institute of Architects, which was an association made by the students of architecture of Sir J.J. School of Art in Mumbai at that time, which was known as the Architectural Students Association, and later this same association grew to be Indian Institute of Architects, and George Whitted was unanimously elected as its first president. So IIA was formed before our freedom, of course. So the answer is IIA. Who was the first Indian head of CPWD? Habib Rahman, S.K. Jogalkar, G.B. Uh, Deolalikar, Shailendra Sharma. So again, just to give a brief about CPWD, just so that everybody is aware about a few facts about these important institutions that are associated with our profession. So Central Public CPWD, the full form is Central Public Works Department. In Hindi, we call it Kendriya Lok Nirman Vibhag. It is the Indian government authority in charge of public sector works. It is working under the Ministry of Urban Development, which is now called MOHUA, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. It deals with buildings, roads, bridges, flyovers, and other complicated structures, including stadiums, auditoriums, laboratories, bunkers, border fencing, and border roads. It came into existence in 1854 when Lord Dalhousie, it was established by Britishers in 1854 when Lord Dalhousie established a central agency for execution of public works and set up Ajmer Provincial Division. It has now grown into a comprehensive construction management department which provides services from project conception to completion and maintenance management. So right now, post independence, of course, the work of CPWD became more important, because then we were in this position where we were shaping new India, where it was all in our hand, and like it is explained in the NPTEL lecture, that it was a blank canvas that was left for us, and then we were supposed to paint it in the way we saw fit. So CPWD had a major role in that, because most of our important government buildings which came at that time after we got our independence uh, have been designed by CPWD, including our Supreme Court, Rail Bhavan, Vigyan Bhavan, and so many other buildings in Delhi, especially in Delhi. So, Ganesh Bikaji Devlalikar, he was the first Indian to head the CPWD department. He is also the one who designed Supreme Court in Delhi. It is headed by usually the CPWD is headed by the Director General, who is the principal technical advisor to the Government of India, and the regions and sub-regions are headed by special DGs and additional DGs respectively. Chief Architect of CPWD also acts as a chairman of local body to approve the government buildings, and with the countrywide presence of CPWD, the strength of CPWD is in its ability to undertake construction of complex projects, even in difficult terrains, and maintenance in post-construction stage. So our answer is G.B. Deolalikar, Ganesh Bikaji Deolalikar. He was the first Indian head of CPWD. The entrance of the Vigyan Bhavan resembles the horseshoe-shaped opening adapted from the facades of Roman architecture, Gothic architecture, Dilwara temple, and Ajanta's Chaitya halls. So, first of all, we'll see what Vigyan Bhavan actually looks like, and a few facts about Vigyan Bhavan. I see a lot of questions. coming. I would cover the questions after I'm done with the session. After I'm done with the 10 questions, I'll answer all your questions at that time altogether. Vigyan Bhavan, or if translated in English, Science Building. It is a premier conference center of the Government of India in New Delhi. It was built in 1956, and over the year it has been used as a venue of conference of national and international stature, seminars and award ceremonies attended by distinguished world leaders and dignitaries. It is managed by the Directorate of Estates under the Ministry of Urban Development, now MOVA, Government of India, and it is maintained by CPW. So this is the entrance of this Vigyan Bhavan building. The main building was designed in 1955 by R.P. Gehlot of CPWD, Central Public Works Department, belonging to Jaipur, in which he incorporated the elements of British Raj architecture evident in the nearby buildings of the Secretariat building, because this is located in Lutyens, Delhi in Resina Hills. So the colonial architecture was replicated over here, along with Hindu and Mughal architecture as well as ancient Buddhist architecture, especially the Chaitya arches of Ajanta caves. The overall style of the building remains modernistic with revivalist elements. It is being called modernist over here is because if you look at this building right now, you see a very plain facade with you see horizontal. The building is very horizontal massing. There are no ornamentation. There is no hint of any typical kind of architecture like we saw in the first session about Indo-Saracenic architecture or colonial architecture. Nothing typically of that. So if you look at this facade of the building, it can be any other kind of modern building. So to add a touch of Indian architecture, then a few elements from Hindu and Mughal and Buddhist architecture were added in this building. But if you remove those elements, then this building would look like any other building. These elements are just, you can say they're not amalgamated or integrated into the building, but rather just added to the modernist build form later. And these are called revivalist elements. It is being called revival. These elements, the elements that have been picked from traditional Hindu or Mughal or Buddhist architecture, that are being called revivalist elements, is because after independence we were trying to find our own identity. So revivalism was at its peak, where the typical traditional Indian architecture, which was specifically typical in our religious institutions, religious buildings, were being picked on from to represent our country. So that's why they are called revivalist elements, specifically in these kind of buildings. So I already showed in the previous question of example of the Chaitya Hall. So these are some of the few examples of Chaitya Hall. The first picture is the interior of the Chaitya Hall. The other two pictures are the entrance of the Chaitya Hall. So if you look at this closely, you see this arch, the entrance arch, and when you look at the entrance of Vigyan Bhavan, you see that same specific arch over here. So it is definitely picked up from the Chaitya Chaitya halls of Ajanta. This entire entry, the element that they have placed at the entry. And this was majorly done because this was going to be a conference center, a convention center, where lots of dignitaries from around the world were going to come. So India at that time kind of wanted to make an impression to the world that it was not going back to its traditional architecture completely. It was moving forward with the world, with its modernist principles, but still to have its own typical identity. It was still inculcating elements from its traditional architecture and adding to it. So that's why it was very important in this building specifically to add this element, to have this entrance, to just signify the identity of India, just to say. So our answer is Ajanta's Chaitya halls. Which of the following are the works of CPWD? We have four options. Sorry, we have three options. Vigyan Bhavan, Supreme Court, Rail Bhavan, and all of these. I'll just give a brief about all three buildings. So Vigyan Bhavan, as I have just explained, it is a premier conference center of the Government of India in Delhi. It was designed by R.P. Gehlot of Central Public Works Department. Supreme Court of India is the supreme judicial authority and the highest court of Republic of India. It is the final court of appeal for all civil and criminal cases in India. It was designed by J.B. Deolalikar, first Indian head of CPWD, which we have discussed in the previous section. Then Rail Bhavan is the headquarters of the Indian Railways. It is located at Rasina Hill, New Delhi, near Sansad Bhavan, the Parliament House, and it was also designed by CPWD. So our answer is all of the above. So all of these works were conducted by CPWD right after our independence, when CPWD was tasked with designing all these important buildings. So during that decade, all these buildings have come up right after our independence. Which of the following elements is used to reduce the solar gain? So the options are brise soleil, large overhangs, louvers, and all of these. What do we mean by solar gain? Solar gain is basically the heat that is gained by the building because of the exposure to sun. So it depends on the geographical location, it depends on the climate, whether you want to increase the solar gain in your building or whether you want to reduce the solar gain in your building. For example, if we take an example of India itself, if you go to north, specifically in Himachal and Kashmir, these places, in these places, because we have cold temperature, we need more solar gain to cope up with the cold harsh temperature. And while when you go to hot and humid climate, which is our coastal regions, or hot and arid climate, which is our western region, Gujarat and Rajasthan, we need to reduce the solar gain because already the place is heated up, so we need to reduce the solar gain. We need to reduce the heat that we are gaining, the building is gaining from the sun. So I'll just explain quickly what these three kinds of elements are. So brise soleil, brise, it's a French word, and in French it literally means sunbreaker. It is an architectural feature of a building that reduces heat gain within that building by deflecting sunlight. The system allows low-level sun to enter a building in the morning, evenings and during winter, but cuts out direct sunlight during summer. So these brise soleil is basically different, you can say, because if you see the example on the right side, these are the different examples of brise soleil. It's basically a shading device that is usually in the form of either vertical or horizontal elements, or a combination of vertical or horizontal elements, and it is designed such that typical to the need of the building according to the climate and geographical location, again like I explained, to allow the light to enter in the mornings and evenings and during winter, but it cuts out direct sunlight during summer. How that happens is because position of sun also keeps changing with the changing weather. So in summer, for example, if this is your earth, in summers the angle of with which the sun moves is actually quite higher, and in winters this same angle is quite lower. So if we have a shading device which is, for example, projected or more than projected, so when the sun moves up, then it itself gives shadow to the building, while in winter when it moves below the I'm sorry, I don't have a diagram. I wish I should have added a diagram to it uh, to explain it better. But when, because the winter sun is at a lower angle, so that light can penetrate. So this is specifically very useful for composite climate, which is very common in major parts of India, UP, MP, Delhi, everywhere we have composite climate where we feel extreme heat and we also go through extreme winters. So this is what the purpose of brise soleil is. And in a typical form, there is a horizontal projection that extends from the sun side facade of the building, and it is most commonly used to prevent facades with a large amount of glass from overheating during the summer. And these are just typical examples of brise soleil, but because it's basically a shading device that can be customized as per your need, so it is not very typical, you can say, in shape or the design. So a lot of modern buildings, for example, one building designed by Santiago Calatrava in the Center of Arts and Science in Spain, Valencia, Spain, has very different kinds of curved designs, these soleil devices installed, because the entire structure is glass, because the whole that part is glass, so they have designed these shading devices so there is not overheating during summer because of it. So this is about brise soleil. And then a louver or lure is a window blind or a shutter with horizontal slats. So what is the typical difference between brise soleil and louver is that louver is usually a part of a window or a door, and second of all, louvers are typically, like in the original design, they are horizontal slats, while brise soleil can be a combination of horizontal, vertical, and different kinds of shapes. So they are angled to admit sunlight and air, and louver is of course adjustable as per your need. You can adjust this, when do you want to allow the sunlight in, when do you want to not allow the sunlight in. And they have two uses. They have two important uses. One is to protect for sun, second was to allow for ventilation. So these are the two typical uses of a louver. And they are angled to admit light and air, but to keep out rain and direct sunshine. The angle of the slats may be adjustable, usually in blinds and windows, or fixed. Arrangement of these are basically arrangement of parallel horizontal blades. These are like blades which are arranged parallelly, and they can be made of glass, wood, and any other material designated to regulate airflow or light penetration. Louvers are often used in windows or doors in order to allow light or air in while keeping sunshine and moisture out. And then third was overhang. So overhang is basically any projector or any cantilevered part of a roof. It could be any kind of roof, and if it is projected, it is called an overhang. And it is projected usually over the vertical component of vertical wall component. So it will, again, it has two purposes. It protects the building from high angle of direct solar radiation and also from rain. And the overhang blocks off the direct solar radiation and allows for ambient daylight inside the built form from the reflected components of daylight. So our answer is all of the above. So all of these elements are used to reduce the solar glare. these all sheet kinds of elements or shading devices, these are used so that we can minimize the direct sunlight exposure of the building, and you can reduce the solar gain that you're getting from the sunlight. Last question for today. The founders of Architects United in Pune are Kanvinde, Rai and Chaudhary, Ghodke and Sharma, Gautam Sarabhai and Veera Sarabhai, or none of these. So this was actually Architects United in Pune. It was talked in the last NPTEL lecture of this week, part 3, when the lecture was talking about the architecture of everyday spaces and how there were architects who learned from outside, like Kanvinde, Hasmukh Patel, Pillu Modi, Charles Correa, and they learned in very good architectural colleges in West, like Cornell and MIT and other places, and they worked with very famous architects also, like Walter Gropius and others. So they were a different category. They were iconic architects of India. While, because need was expanding, we had we had so much of need of housing specifically, and the different kinds of classes were increasing. For example, upper middle class was growing, middle class was growing. So to have architecture for these people, the architecture of everyday life, other architects were also making a lot of buildings which are not very much talked about, like the pioneer architects like Goria and Doshi and others. But these architects still played a very important role in shaping the modern Indian architecture of India. And that's one such example is Architects United in Pune, who worked on the everyday architecture of India at that time. Specifically, they worked on housings and bungalows and other kinds of societies and shared housings and other kinds of examples like that. So I would just briefly talk about it. So Architects United in Pune is one of the Pune's pioneering architecture practices. It was founded by Abhay Sharma and Vijay Ghodke and Devdutt Ghodke. Everyday architecture, their main motive was everyday architecture driven by popular and market demands. So market demand at that time was housing more, and influenced by modernist architecture. So all their buildings had a very modernist touch, very minimal elements, no use of typical classical elements, use of more horizontal surfaces, and minimalist in their own way, and no use of ornamentation and other features. So had a very modernistic approach, and they were based on functional and climatic considerations. That is another very important part of the architecture which was evolving at that time, that it was important to consider you could learn from the practices that were happening everywhere, but you had to customize it according to the climate or the local condition that was happening in India. And these kind of functional and climatic considerations were reflected in building facades. For example, if you see the pictures here, you see large cantilevers over here, you see overhangs over windows, which is to block the sun out. So these were the typical climatic considerations that was happening in India because we needed it specific to our context. And their important projects included freestanding bungalows, cooperative housing, society apartments, and again they were the ones who worked on the very similar concept that we saw in the Doshi house, the modernist house, the combination of living and dining, the bathroom, washroom attached to the bedroom, and other options. So our answer is founders of Architects United in Pune are Ghodke and Sharma. And in last session, I talked about this one question where I thought something would be the answer, and then the answer that was given to provide it to us was saying something else, so I told you that I would confirm it. It was about the homogeneity of built environments. So I confirmed with the professor, and they said, they mentioned that the answer is actually all of the above. It was not just globalization. And just to repeat, I would just show the question again. So the question from last session, which we had a confusion over, the transformation of cities and homogenizing built environment is the impact of, and then we had four options. And I thought the appropriate answer should be only globalization or architecture, because globalization on architecture had the most severe impact on homogenizing the built environment. But the answer is actually all of the above, and the reason could be because the question also says the transformation of cities. So the transformation of cities is actually being influenced by these other factors that are being mentioned here. For example, traffic patterns. Of course, there are different kinds of developments: DOT and TOT, transit-oriented development and development-oriented transit. Basically, one where transit is laid out and then development happens, or when the development happens and then transit is laid out. So there are different kinds of ways, and then there are so many other things, so many other factors. So of course the transformation of cities is somewhat dependent on the traffic patterns. And then regional politics of course played a major role over here, in the transformation of cities, on what would be the style, what would be the element that could be added to the style, what should be built first, what should be focused on more. So of course regional politics played a role. And then homogenizing built environment could be influenced by regional politics, because as I mentioned in the last class also, that having a skyscraper in your country, having a skyscraper is now a symbol of economic dominance in the world right now. So the taller your skyscraper is, or the number of skyscrapers you have, is kind of a political statement. It is a economic statement, it's a political statement. So of course politics is also part of it. So the answer of this would be all of these. And now about questions. So if you have any doubts, you can write the questions in the chat box, and I would just quickly answer all the questions that have been already mentioned over here. Starting with CPWD is Central Public Works Department. Is it based on ventilation? Yes, the stack effect is actually based on the idea of ventilation only, that the warm air rises up and then it moves out, and then the cool air can come in. Harshvardhan has asked that in Assam mud house, the material is mud bricks, sun-dried bricks, or any other. I'm not very sure of this. I would search on it and I would let you know. I'm not very sure of it. What is the typical thing they have used, if they have used sun-dried brick or mud bricks? What is horizontal massing? So horizontal massing is in the sense that instead of building tall buildings, we're building more horizontal buildings. That means it would be 1 or 2 or 3 floors high, and it would be wider. It would be longer in its elevation. That's horizontal massing. Rather than having taller buildings that the width is less and the height is more, or you have multiple floors. For example, your vertical massing is your skyscraper, and horizontal massing would be any kind of building which has 2 or 3 floors. Mostly, usually it's 2 floors, and it's longer in length. That's horizontal massing. One second. Lower plinth, I think, I'm not very sure, but I am answering the question based on the logic over here. So when we had load bearing walls, then we had definitely had deeper foundations also. So I think we needed higher plinths for that also. But because of RCC, we could manage the support on columns. Another thing is that's why I think the plinth was lower in height at that time. But I would confirm this answer. I would search on it and I would let you know. I could search it even now and let you know. I'm not very sure of this aspect, but it could be. What are cantilevered porches? So porch is a front part of the building. Basically, porch is a front part of the building, and usually porches are for parking, you can there is porch is basically an entrance to any kind of building. That's a porch. And a cantilevered porch is that there is a huge projection, there is a overhang from the building. That's a cantilever. Cantilever porches are basically porches that have a roof over their head. It's projected, and it is cantilevered because if it is not supported on columns, then it is cantilevered. So that's what a cantilevered porch is. Who built the Vigyan Bhavan? R. K. Gehlot. In which year the Architect United in Pune was found? Somewhere around 1950s. The exact year is mentioned in the NPTEL lecture and the slides, you can check that. Can you give a brief on the IIA logo which you showed in previous slides? I do not know about it in detail, sorry. I have not studied the logo. Of course, if you are curious about it, I can search on it, but I have not studied the logo. I added the logo because that is the IIA logo, but I do not know the in depth about the logo right now. As we see in revival colonialism, Indo-Saracenic, the plan is Western. Why? So what was happening in Indo-Saracenic architecture was that Indo-Saracenic architecture came into being while Britishers were still ruling this country. So what their idea at that time was that they wanted to have something that represents India, but they didn't want to lose touch of what they are. And that's what they knew. That's what they knew. That's how they knew what the plans basically. That was their style of building. So in Indo-Saracenic architecture, what they basically did was to unify the country in a way, or to create a symbol. They did this, that they had their Western plans, they had those facades, and then they amalgamated some features from Indian architecture or Mughal architecture or not Mughal architecture, Indian architecture or Indo-Islamic architecture, and they amalgamated those features in the buildings. So in Indo-Saracenic, what happened was that only the form changed, but the plan was still Western in concept. Their idea was to just create something that people of India could relate to. So they just picked some elements and added to it, for example, chhatris and domes and other elements, and they amalgamated them in their buildings. So that's why. Indian plan in modern building after independence. What are you asking? Can you give Indian plan in modern building after independence? It depends. What do we understand by Indian plan, first of all, here? If we are talking about the traditional houses that we used to have, especially in our rural areas, it might be suitable to the context if we are building there. And I think in modern era, more than that, what matters is the context or the functionality. So even when after independence, even when CPWD was trying to identify the style or figure out what they should go forward with, what they did was they thought of carrying forward the Lutyens idea so that the area at least looks homogeneous. So that was their idea, and I think the floor planning in that time specifically, again, because the Supreme Court building also has very similar features to the typical Western building plan, that there is one center with a dome and then there are two things on the side. So it is also a very typical plan. But what do we mean by Indian plan? Because Britishers were here for so long, they have influenced the entire architecture of it, and they have established most of the institutions that we have right now. So what do you even mean by Indian plan? I'm not very sure what an Indian plan is, because we didn't have a parliament, we didn't have these buildings before Britishers came along. But yeah, we used to have these mahals where these sabhas would happen, and diwane khas, diwane. So they were functioning differently, but of course with the changing need and the way we are transitioning into the world right now, I think we're doing pretty well combining different elements. And if you think about Indian elements being incorporated in plans, then of course, specifically addressing the climate and the geographical features and our traditions, we see a use of courtyards in our buildings more, which Britishers didn't do. But in modernist Indian buildings, where architects, specifically Charles Correa, has this immense use of courtyards in his buildings, which he adds to his buildings. So this is a very Indian feature, and then you can say that yeah, it's an Indian plan that we have this feature in our building where we are creating a traditional Indian congregation space. Could we use plain cement concrete structures, PCC over RCC? PCC cannot be used to make structures. Our PCC is just cement concrete. It can be used to fill spaces, to create, make flooring. It cannot be used to create structures. RCC, basically PCC, when you add reinforced these saria, what is this thing called in English? I'm forgetting the name. So steel bars, when you add these bars in your PCC, then RCC is created. And these bars are added so that you have added strength. So PCC cannot be used in creating structure. RCC could be. Can a color theme affect the type of architecture? In the sense, I didn't understand your question properly. Could you please reframe it? Color theme will affect the type of architecture. So even if different buildings are portrayed in different colors, their form would be still be their identity, I would say. And second is that this idea of having a color theme is actually used to create a harmony in different kinds of buildings, where different buildings of different architectural styles are present all together. And then they are given a similar color theme or a similar material palette to give a sense of harmony or homogeneity. Churches are usually white, but the churches made during colonial rule were red. I don't know the specific reason for this, that why they were mostly red during at that time. It could be it could be a response to our own Indian architecture, because we have this strong essence of red buildings and a lot of different kinds of traditional architecture. It could be a response to that. I would search on this more. You are asking. There was instance in videos that British first go with Indo-Saracenic, then go for hegemony, then go with colonial. Please give brief for this. So, I am not aware what hegemony is. So, yeah. So, Indo-Saracenic came into being because they wanted to create this one unified image. Then, after the colonial came into being after Indo-Saracenic, was because in the independence movement of India, we were fighting more for our freedom, and it was getting stronger by the hour, the fight to get free from the British rule. So then Britishers realized that they have to assert their dominance over here. So again, architecture is one of the means through which they asserted their dominance over here. And that's why they brought the neoclassical colonial architecture back to assert their dominance over here. That, yeah, again, their architecture is dominant over here. They are the ones who are ruling this. So this change from Indo-Saracenic to colonial happened because of this. They went for Indo-Saracenic because they wanted to give Indians a sense of unity, a sense of image. And then they again went to neoclassical colonial architecture because Indians at that time started to gain sense, and the independence movement was getting very strong, and they had to assert their dominance. So they used architecture as one of the means to assert their dominance. I do not know what is a casual meandering pattern. I don't know if that word came somewhere. If you could tell me where this word came in the lectures, I would go through that specific video and find out. What I understand from meandering pattern when I use my head just like that is meanders are basically curves that are formed because of the river when river flows. So these edges that are formed when a river flows, these are called meanders. So if it's a curvilinear pattern, I'm not sure, I'm not aware. If you've heard it, if you have read this in a specific lecture, can you please let me? No, in lecture 11. Oh yeah, I have not gone to lecture 11 myself yet. That would be covered in the next week. I would definitely answer you. I'll just write this down. Yeah, I would see this and answer you in the next session. I have not gone myself through the lecture 11 yet. I also prepare during the week. I think these are also again part of the further lectures, Mr. Harshvardhan, and I have not gone through these lectures yet myself, and so I really don't know answer to these questions right now. I think I would be able to answer these questions when I myself go through these lectures and research on these topic more. I am writing down your questions so that I remember to answer these in the next class, because these topics that you are talking about right now, we have not been covered yet, and I have not myself gone through these lectures right now. I will have to do the research and reading on the next week's lectures, and then I'll be able to answer your questions. I'm just writing down your questions so that I will be able to answer in the next class. Thank you to you too, Tamanna. Thank you, Fatima. I think I the reason I could think of why after independence there were a lot of architects in Mumbai uh, could be because Mumbai is our commercial capital. Lot of growth was happening in that place. So that's why lots of architects were growing in Mumbai specifically. There was a lot of inflectuation of different kinds of population inside the city, which was creating the need of different kinds of buildings. So I think that's why there was a rise of architects in Mumbai after that time. Howrah railway stations are which architectural style? I think it would be Indo-Sarsenic only, I, or it could be revivalist also. No, Howrah was built before independence, so definitely not revivalist. Uh, I think it would be mentioned in the lecture. I'll just quickly check and confirm it. I think it would be Indo-Sarsenic only with a strong usage of uh, uh, it is heavily ornamented. I'm not very sure. Just let me just quickly check. I think sir mentioned it in his PPT. Because it happened I think in classical time, but it is quite heavily ornamented. My laptop is hanging. Sorry. So Havra railway station is actually a part of neoclassical colonial style, as mentioned in the lecture number. It's lecture number 4. PPT. We can see Art Deco in Mumbai and not in Delhi and other places like Calcutta. Uh, it happened again, I think, because it was again a commercial center. And then at that time, a lot of things were happening. Modern structures were coming in, for example, and specifically machinery was coming in, different kinds of your cars and ships. And Mumbai was a port city also. So, and the Art Deco style of Mumbai is actually a lot influenced by the nautical architecture, because which I think is influenced because of uh, it being a port also. So I think that is a reason that this happened. And modernism avoids disconnect between exterior and interior, but as Singh said, this is lacking in Vigyan Bhavan as being just the elements we're taking. So is the Indo-Saracenic also lacking this, and how would you create modern building materials? Yeah. So sir has explained this also, as he was talking about this part where interior and exterior were lacking it, and which was happened in Vigyan Bhavan, and as you would have seen in the lecture also, he showed a few of the examples where when he eliminated those elements, the building didn't they looked like any other building. So same was the case with no, same was the case with colonial architecture and not actually Indo-Saracenic. No, yes. Same was the case with Indo-Saracenic, because the plan was not changing and they were amalgamating in the form. The plan was not changing, they were amalgamating it just in the form. So of course, the plan was, so as if you would remember from the lecture, Sir typically said this about Indo-Saracenic architecture and also colonial architecture, that even though somewhere there was some element in that form, or there was some Indian element in the build form, the heart was not truly Indian, because the plan was not truly Indian. And then you're asking, how would you create modern building with Indian elements? I think the best way to go with this is to actually, because all these style or eras that came by, from a few of the styles that were covered in pre-independence and then after independence, this modernism and others. So what was lacking over here is that we are only trying to incorporate things in the form or the elevation, the elements through which we are trying to make it look more Indian. So I think a good way would be to actually include it in the plan also, and then we can take some of the typical planning elements from our own traditional literature that we have available, and then we can use those, and one of which can also respond to the climate. For example, the Indian traditional architecture, and specifically the vernacular architecture that is very prevalent in India, in different parts of India, they have very climate responsive solutions. So not so no, by just adding chhatri or a dome is not enough. Maybe we can take more inspiration from those climate responsive, typical, traditional methods that we have, vernacular methods we have, uh, and then these typical climate responsive features we can maybe inculcate that to give our typical modern Indian touch to our modern buildings. I think this is what will be covered in critical regionalism in the further lectures, because Sir has mentioned this quite often, that how architects tackled the modernism in specifically in Indian context was via critical regionalism, which was basically tackling the climate responsiveness of the building with the help of Indian typical features. You're saying Havra railway station, as told by Sir, was feather in the cap. Please elaborate. So, as I just mentioned, at Havra railway station was a part of neoclassical colonial architecture. So, at that time, Britishers were again trying to push their dominance with the help of architecture over here. So when they, and then as you will very well know, that Britishers are responsible for creating most of the railway structure that we have. So building Howrah railway station, because it's connected to Kolkata, it was a port city, and then building a huge railway station over there, and then establishing it in architecture, in their architectural style, was a feather in their cap. In the sense, it was an achievement for them. This was another very huge big building that they added in their list, that yeah, that which they used it like that. And Howrah railway station right now is used, I think, used by millions right now. It's a very crowded station, it is. And it's also a very different kind of design station as compared to the other kinds of stations we have. It has a very different design in the sense that when you enter a railway station, you have, for example, this is a building and this is your entrance to the railway station. Then the platforms are parallel like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In Howrah station, if this is your entrance, the platforms are laid like this. So you enter, and you can access any of the platform just with the entrance. So that's also a very interesting design of it, but I think it was a feather in cap for the British Raj at that time, because they established such a huge building in their dominant architecture style. I think because while Herbert Baker designed a few of the prominent buildings, I think Lutyens was the one who had the major say or the major hold in it. That's why I think we call it Lutyens Delhi, because he was charged with the planning of it too. So I think that's why we call it Lutyens Delhi more. Just like when you talk about who was the first person who went on the moon, everybody remembers Neil Armstrong. We forget often the name of the second person who was along with Neil Armstrong, but Neil Armstrong was the first one to put their foot on it. So I think that's the case. classic uh, plus modernism equals classical modernism. Please elaborate in lecture 5. Okay. Uh, I don't exactly remember what was there in lecture 5, but classic plus modernism is classical modernism. I the answer to this would be that the classic architectural style that we have. For example, the inspirations from the typical Greek, Roman, and other parts that we use in different structures, which then, when neoclassicism came, they bring those elements back again. For example, the Roman and the Greek ionic and Doric columns and others features. So when those features are added along with your modernist ideologies, that would be your classical modernism. For example, it would have modernist ideology, but some element would be classical. So I think that would be classical modernism. I would just quickly go through this lecture 5 that you're asking me of, where I will see what is the context of it really. I'm sorry, my laptop is hanging a lot and I don't know what is happening. I'm sorry, I don't know if my voice is also going through or not. I'm not even able to access the team meeting right now. Some issue is happening. I was trying to open the PPT, but some issue is happening and my system is really hanging a lot. So in lecture 5, I just got Unfortunately, the meeting got disconnected because of some error, and I think everybody has left the meeting, and I could not even conclude the meeting properly. It's already 8, we'll conclude the meeting. My system is still not responding well. Sorry for the